The worst part about heartbreak isn't the loss, it's the betrayal. At least that's what I thought when I first found out. I had always believed that losing someone you loved was the hardest part. That feeling of emptiness, the aching absence where once there was warmth, comfort, laughter, and shared memories. But then came the moment of revelation, the gut-wrenching realization that everything I had invested in, everything I thought was real, was a lie. The moment Samantha turned to me with those cold, detached eyes, the very essence of our relationship, our foundation, crumbled in an instant. "Nathan, I've been seeing someone else," she said, her voice strangely calm, as though she had said these words 100 times before. "His name is Jason. It's been going on for months." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. Jason. My mind couldn't wrap around it. It couldn't compute the reality that the woman I had given my heart to, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. The air in the room seemed to freeze, and for a split second, I thought I might pass out. The world around me blurred. Months? The image of Jason, her ex-boyfriend, the one I had been assured was long gone from her life, flooded my mind. The man she swore meant nothing anymore. The man I had accepted as nothing more than a fleeting memory. But now he was the reason I stood in this kitchen, numb and shaking, unable to process the enormity of what had just been revealed. "How could you?" The words came out before I even thought about them. The accusation in my voice was sharp, raw with the pain of it all. "How long? How could you do this to me?" Samantha didn't flinch. She didn't even look remorseful. Instead, she simply sighed, glancing at me briefly, then back at the ground. Her hands trembled, but she hid it well. "It just happened, Nathan," she said, her tone indifferent, almost rehearsed. "I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to hurt me?" The anger in my chest flared. "And yet here you are, telling me that you've been sleeping with someone else for months while I've been here, trusting you. I loved you, I still love you. And you let me believe this whole time that everything was fine. You let me live in a lie." Her face softened, and for a fleeting moment, there was the smallest flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. "I didn't want to hurt you, Nathan," she repeated. "But I was unhappy. I needed more than what we had, and Jason gave me that." Her words stung. More than the betrayal itself, more than the affair, it was the revelation that I had been insufficient for her. I had given her everything I could offer, emotionally, financially, physically, and somehow, it was never enough. "I wasn't enough," I muttered. My voice barely audible. Samantha stepped forward, her hand reaching out as though to comfort me, but I pulled away instinctively. "You can't fix this," I said, my voice cracking. "This can't be fixed. You've broken something in me that I don't think can ever be repaired." I turned and walked away from her, my mind a whirlwind of confusion, anger and disbelief. I couldn't be in that room any longer. I couldn't stand to be in the same space with her. I spent the next few days in a haze, stumbling through life like a ghost. My apartment, once a home filled with shared memories, felt foreign, hollow. Every room I entered, every corner I turned, reminded me of her, of us. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the signs? The late nights when she came home tired, but wouldn't tell me where she had been. The mysterious text messages that she would quickly hide whenever I came close. And those small, insignificant moments, her evasions, the way she would always smile a little too brightly when I asked her about Jason, or when she insisted he was just an old friend, nothing more. How had I been so trusting? So naive? I thought I knew Samantha. I thought I understood who she was. But the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a future with, was a stranger to me now. The betrayal was the sharpest pain I had ever felt, and it wasn't just because of what she had done. It was because of what I had failed to see, what I had failed to accept. She was never who I thought she was. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Samantha and Jason, their laughter echoing in my mind. How could she move on so easily? How had she used me? How had she convinced me that everything was fine, while she was living in a secret world with him? I needed answers. I needed closure. It wasn't just the cheating that broke me. It wasn't even just the lies. What tore me apart was how quickly Samantha had moved on. She hadn't even given me time to process. The moment I was out of the picture, She was already with him. I wasn't even worth the decency of a proper explanation. The day after the confrontation, I found myself doing something I never thought I would do. I went through her things. I rifled through her phone, her drawers, the places she had always kept private. I felt dirty, like I was crossing a line I shouldn't. But the need for answers, for some kind of truth, was too strong. That's when I found the messages. Hundreds of messages. Between her and Jason, spanning months. Love notes, shared plans, their secret meetups. It was all there, laid out in front of me like a roadmap of deception. And then, there was something else. Something that cut deeper than the affair itself. Samantha had been using me. She had been using me for my stability, for the life I had worked so hard to provide. I was just a step to her, a way to climb to the life she wanted. I wasn't just a man she cheated on. I was a tool she had used for her own gain. And that was a thought I couldn't escape. How long? The question hung in the air, my voice hoarse and raw as I muttered it to myself. How long had she been planning this? The days after the discovery were a blur. I found myself pacing the apartment, replaying every moment with Samantha, dissecting every conversation, every touch. The betrayal was not just personal. It was a public humiliation. How many people had known about Jason? How many of my friends had watched me pour my heart out, only to see her slip away, piece by piece, behind my back? I felt like a fool. I felt stupid. But the hardest part of it all wasn't just the affair. It wasn't the lies. It was the realization that I didn't know who I was anymore. Samantha had been my world. She had been my everything. Now, I was left with nothing. A broken version of myself that didn't know how to pick up the pieces. Where do you go from here? I spent the following weeks, sinking deeper into isolation. Friends tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to face them. How could I? How could I explain to anyone that the woman I loved had ripped my heart out and tossed it away without a second thought? The worst part of losing someone you love isn't the hurt. It's the emptiness that follows. In the days after Samantha walked away, I found myself in a state of constant disarray, a kind of emotional paralysis. It wasn't even grief. At least not the kind I was familiar with. It was a hollow feeling, a void that stretched across my chest and filled every empty space in my mind. I had been consumed by her. By the life we had built. By the dreams we had shared. I didn't know who I was without her. I didn't know who I was without the constant reassurance that I was enough. And now, I was left to face the brutal truth. I wasn't enough for her. And I had never been. The first few days after I moved out were nothing short of a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. The bed I once shared with Samantha now felt cold. Empty. The very air in the apartment seemed to suffocate me with the weight of everything that had been taken from me. I spent hours lying there, staring at the ceiling, the once familiar hum of the city outside now a distant noise that did nothing to pull me out of my spiral. I didn't eat much. I didn't sleep. When I finally managed to drag myself out of bed, I would go through the motions of daily life, shower, dress, work, but everything felt like I was moving through a fog. What the hell happened to me? That was the question I asked myself every day. What happened to the man I was before? The man who was full of hope, who believed in love, who thought his life had a direction. That version of me felt like a distant memory, like a character in someone else's story. And worst of all, I wasn't sure how to get him back. I spent hours scrolling through old photos of Samantha and me, remembering the laughs, the trips, the inside jokes. But each image only served to deepen the wound. She wasn't just a lover, she was a mirror to my own identity. Every smile, every hug, every promise we had made, now felt like a lie. There were times when I would think back to the little things she did. The way she would run her fingers through my hair when she thought I wasn't paying attention, or how she would curl up beside me at night, resting her head on my chest. I used to think those moments were enough to define us. I was wrong. Those small, intimate moments were illusions, moments crafted to keep me complacent, comfortable. You were never enough for her. The words rang in my head, louder than any comfort I tried to offer myself. I had been the fallback. The safe choice. And now, I wasn't even that. I was discarded. I was disposable. For days, I tried to avoid the thought of Jason, but there was no escaping it. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him, his face, his grin, the man who had replaced me so easily in Samantha's life. He was a shadow, a ghost in every memory of Samantha and me. I hated him. I didn't even know him, and I hated him. But what hurt even more was the fact that he was everything I wasn't, or at least everything I had failed to be in her eyes. Was it the money? Was it the charm? Was it something I lacked that made her choose him? I wanted to hate him for stealing Samantha from me. But in truth, I was angry at myself for being so blind, angry at myself for believing I was enough. One evening, as the night stretched on and I found myself sitting in front of a dimly lit laptop, I decided to do something I hadn't done in weeks. I opened my social media. At first, it was an unconscious action, one of those mindless scrolling sessions people do to avoid thinking too hard about their lives. But as I flicked through post after post, photo after photo, a realization hit me. I had been living for her. I had built my life around her. My identity had been wrapped up in her love, in the validation she gave me. But now, all of it was gone. And I had no idea who I was anymore. The first few posts that appeared on my feed were filled with memories of Samantha. Old photos of her and me on vacations, celebrations, family gatherings. But now, they seemed like another lifetime. And then, I saw it. An update. Samantha and Jason, together. They had posted a photo of themselves at a restaurant, holding hands, their smiles wide and carefree. My stomach dropped. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, everything boiled inside me. The comments flooded in. Friends, family, mutual acquaintances, all congratulating them, applauding their happiness. And there, at the bottom of the post, I saw a comment from one of Samantha's friends. "You two look amazing together. So glad you found each other." It felt like a slap in the face. The entire world seemed to be congratulating them, and here I was, struggling to find a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I closed the laptop, not caring anymore about the world Samantha had left me in. I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My thoughts were heavy, the emotional numbness wearing off, replaced by the raw sting of betrayal. But in the silence, something strange happened. I began to realize something important. I was not defined by her actions. I was not defined by the love I gave her. There was still more to me than this pain. There was still more to me than the man I had been with Samantha. I stood up, my legs shaky but firm, and walked over to the window. The night sky outside was clear, the stars scattered like tiny distant points of light. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I made a choice. I will not let her destroy me. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It wasn't a decision made out of revenge. It was simply a moment of clarity. A recognition that I could rebuild myself. I couldn't stay in this apartment, in this prison of memories. The next day, I started looking for a new place to live. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was going to do. But I knew I couldn't keep running from this pain. I had to face it, head on. As I packed up my things, I couldn't help but reflect on everything I had gone through, everything that had led me to this point. But now, there was a spark of hope. A tiny ember of possibility. Samantha had been my world. But now, it was time to build my own. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is accepting that you don't need to understand everything to move forward. The next few weeks were a blur of disjointed moments, quiet, empty nights spent staring at the ceiling, and days where I could barely summon the energy to function. But somewhere deep within me, something shifted. The numbness that had consumed me started to crack. And I realized that the only way forward was through the pain, not around it. I had spent so much time in the darkness, blaming myself, replaying every moment with Samantha, trying to find some way to make it make sense. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were no answers that would fix this. There was no magic word. No way to change what had happened. The only thing I could do now was figure out how to move on, how to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been lost. I found a new apartment, a small one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the floors cold, but there was something freeing about it. It was a blank slate, a place to start over. It was the first step in rebuilding not just my life, but my identity. I spent days cleaning, organizing, trying to turn the space into something that felt like me, rather than a reflection of the life I had shared with Samantha. The apartment was a physical manifestation of the emotional space I was creating for myself, a place where I could heal. But even as I tried to fill the empty space with furniture, I couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that crept in during the quiet moments. The silence in the apartment was deafening. One night, after an exhausting day of work, I sat down on the couch with a glass of wine, trying to relax. I had been doing well, pushing through the pain, keeping my mind occupied with everything I needed to do to keep moving forward. But as the evening wore on, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The loneliness. The emptiness. The deep yearning for something I couldn't have. I had wanted Samantha to be my forever. I had invested everything into us, into her. And now, here I was, alone. The ache was unbearable. Why did she have to do this? I muttered aloud to no one in particular. The tears that had been held back for so long finally breaking free. It was the first time I had cried in weeks, and it felt as though a dam had burst inside me. I let the tears fall, one after another, until my chest ached from the release. I didn't expect anyone to come rushing in to comfort me. I had no one. The people I had once trusted, the ones who had surrounded me, had all faded into the background when I needed them most. This was my battle, my burden. But in that moment of raw vulnerability, I realized something that shifted the course of my thoughts. I didn't need her anymore. Not in the way I had thought I did. I had thought I needed her to feel whole, to feel validated. But I was still here. I was still breathing. And though it felt impossible, I was still capable of moving forward. I wasn't broken beyond repair. The next day, I made a decision. I was done with the pity party. I was done with feeling sorry for myself. I signed up for a gym membership. It wasn't just about getting fit though. It was about regaining control of my body, of my mind. I needed a distraction, yes. But more than that, I needed to feel strong again. I needed to remind myself that I had the ability to move, to change, to evolve. The gym was a challenge, one I didn't want to face but knew I needed. At first the weights felt heavy. Each rep was a reminder of how weak I felt inside, how broken I was. But I kept pushing through, one day at a time. After a few weeks, I started to feel a shift. It wasn't monumental, but it was real. My body felt stronger. My mind was clearer. The physical exertion was taking its toll, but it was a good kind of pain, a pain that let me know I was still alive. One afternoon I was sitting in a cafe, scrolling aimlessly through my phone when something caught my eye, a notification from Samantha. It had been weeks since I last heard from her. I had resisted the urge to reach out, to ask her why she did it, to beg her to explain herself. But I knew better now. I had spent enough time in that emotional prison. But still, when I saw her name on my phone screen, I hesitated. "Can we talk?" The message was short. No apology. No explanation, just that. My stomach churned. What was there to talk about? What was left to say? I had moved on. I had to. But I found myself typing a response anyway. "Why? So you can hurt me again?" I wrote, my fingers shaking as I hit send. It was raw. It was angry. But it was the truth. I had been hurt enough. I wasn't going to go back down that road. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. But when her response came, it was unexpected. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. I was confused. I don't expect forgiveness, but I just needed to say that." I read the message over and over again. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't an apology that would heal me. But in that moment, I realized something important. Her apology didn't need to be my closure. I didn't need her to fix this. I didn't need her to make things right. I could do that on my own. And so, I closed the message and deleted her contact from my phone. I wasn't going to hold on to the past any longer. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in front of my mirror, looking at the man I had become. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked away from Samantha. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed, left in pieces on the floor. I had put myself back together. I had started rebuilding from the inside out, piece by piece. I was stronger, more resilient. And more importantly, I was free. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a fresh bottle of wine. I poured myself a glass and raised it in the air. to new beginnings, I whispered to no one, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. To reclaiming myself. It wasn't a victory yet. But it was a start. The beginning of something new. And I was ready for it. Sometimes, the hardest part of moving on isn't the pain. It's the fear of the unknown. As the weeks passed, the initial wave of heartbreak started to subside. The heavy fog that had clouded my thoughts, making everything feel distant and impossible, began to lift. I found myself slowly re-engaging with life, but in a way that was unfamiliar to me. This was a different kind of living. For the first time in months, I felt a strange mixture of freedom and fear. It was like stepping into a vast, empty space after having been locked in a small room for so long. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who I was without the labels I had placed on myself. Samantha's boyfriend. The man who had it all figured out. I'm not that man anymore, I thought to myself. And that's okay. I began to carve out a new routine for myself, one that didn't revolve around avoiding the pain, but instead focused on confronting it head on. I went to therapy, not because I thought it would fix me immediately, but because I needed help navigating the chaos that was now my life. At first, the therapy sessions were awkward. I didn't know how to talk about the things that had been eating me alive. I was still filled with so much anger, at Samantha, at Jason, at myself for not seeing the signs, for not being enough. But as time passed, I started opening up. The therapist, Dr. Edwards, was kind but direct, pushing me to face my emotions instead of hiding from them. She asked questions that made me uncomfortable, questions that forced me to look inward. What does it feel like to no longer be someone's priority? She asked one day. The question struck me like a thunderclap. I had spent so much time wondering what went wrong in our relationship, but I had never truly stopped to consider how I had let myself become so emotionally dependent on someone else. I had allowed Samantha to define my worth, my happiness. And now, without her, I was left with nothing but the remnants of a life that had once been mine. It feels like I've lost everything, I answered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Dr. Edwards nodded, her expression understanding. But what if you didn't lose everything? What if this is an opportunity to rediscover what truly makes you happy, independent of anyone else? That was the moment I realized something crucial. I had been so focused on who I thought I was with Samantha, that I had forgotten who I was on my own. I started to challenge myself in ways I never had before. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. I started reading books that weren't about relationships or fixing things, but rather about self-empowerment, about finding joy in the small moments, about rediscovering life for me. The painting class was an unexpected form of therapy. There was something deeply therapeutic about letting colors flow across a canvas without worrying about what the outcome would be. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to meet anyone's expectations. It was just me and the paint. There, in the quiet, I started to find a sense of peace, one brushstroke at a time. One evening, a few months later, I met her. Her name was Emma. She was nothing like Samantha. She was calm, grounded, and unhurried. When we met, it was at a local bookstore, a place I had started frequenting in the afternoons to clear my mind. I was thumbing through a book on philosophy when she approached me, her smile warm and genuine. I didn't think much of it at first. I had spent so many months avoiding any thoughts of relationships that I wasn't sure I was ready for one, even though part of me knew it was inevitable. You look like someone who knows a good book when they see one, she said, leaning in slightly. I looked up, a little startled, but her kindness was disarming. I try, I replied, smiling in return. We started talking about books, about philosophy, and soon the conversation flowed effortlessly. It felt light, refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after being stuck in a small, stale room for far too long. She asked me about my life, my interests, but she never pried into the things I wasn't ready to share. As we parted that evening, I realized something. I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel like I had to live up to some version of myself, or pretend to be someone I wasn't. Emma wasn't trying to fill a void, she was just there, existing alongside me in the moment. In the weeks that followed, Emma and I spent more time together. We didn't jump into a relationship right away. Instead, we took things slowly, letting the connection develop naturally. I could tell she was different from Samantha. She didn't need me to complete her, she wasn't looking for something to fill an empty space. She had her own life, her own passions, her own journey. For the first time in months, I felt like I was doing something for me. Not for Samantha, not for anyone else, just for me. But even though things were moving forward, I still had my setbacks. There were days when the pain of the past would resurface. There were nights when I would find myself lying awake, wondering if I was truly healed, or if I was just pretending to be. Healing isn't linear. One night, as I was reflecting on everything that had happened, my failed relationship, the betrayal, the pain, and my slow journey to recovery, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hand. I looked out the window at the city lights, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. The past still stung, but it no longer controlled me. For the first time since Samantha had left, I felt truly at peace. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight in my chest lift. I had been betrayed, I had been broken. But I had also grown. I had learned the hardest lesson of all: I am enough. It wasn't about Samantha anymore. It wasn't about Jason, or any of the things that had once consumed me. It was about me. It was about finding my strength, my joy, and my path forward. And with that clarity came a profound sense of freedom. There are parts of us we don't know exist until we let someone else in. The days following my moment of clarity were filled with quiet moments of reflection and quiet victories. Every small victory felt monumental, and each day that passed was another step away from the pain that had threatened to swallow me. I was becoming a new version of myself, stronger, more resilient, and with a clearer sense of who I was outside of my past with Samantha. I had learned a valuable lesson in these last few months. Healing is not a destination, it's a journey. But still, despite the progress I'd made, I had my doubts. The idea of love, of giving my heart away again, was something I wasn't sure I could face. I wasn't ready to be vulnerable again, not yet. I wasn't ready to trust. Emma, on the other hand, was the antithesis of everything I had experienced with Samantha. She was grounded, calm, and patient. She wasn't in a hurry for anything. She had never tried to force anything between us. We met at the bookstore, but over the following weeks, we found ourselves meeting more often. Sometimes just for coffee, sometimes for long walks in the park, talking about books, life, the world. There were moments when I could tell she was trying to reach me, trying to get me to open up, to trust her. But she never pushed. She always let me go at my own pace. "I'm not looking for a relationship," I told her one afternoon, as we sat at a local cafe, sipping tea and watching the world go by. "At least not yet." She smiled, a soft and understanding smile. "I'm not either. But I think we both need to take things slowly, and that's okay." Her words were like a balm on the rawness of my heart. For the first time since everything with Samantha had ended, I felt the possibility of something real. But I was scared. I was scared of what it meant to trust again. Scared of what it might cost me. But there were moments when I couldn't ignore the pull between Emma and me. She was kind, funny, and disarmingly honest. She didn't just ask about my day, she genuinely listened when I talked. She made me feel like I mattered again, like I had something valuable to offer. I was starting to see the possibility of love in a new light. Still, I was terrified. "How do you do it?" I asked her one evening, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "How do you trust people? How do you open up without wondering if they're just going to hurt you?" Emma didn't hesitate. She simply looked at me, her eyes warm and patient. "You don't. You take a leap of faith. You trust because you want to, not because you have to." I thought about her words long after we parted that evening. Trust wasn't about waiting for the perfect person, the perfect moment. It was about choosing to trust. It was about allowing myself to feel something again, to let someone in despite the risk. And the hardest part was letting go of the past and not letting it control the present. As the weeks passed, I began to realize something. I wasn't just avoiding trust because of what Samantha had done to me. I was avoiding it because of myself. I was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of feeling exposed and raw again. I was afraid of repeating the same mistakes, of putting myself out there and getting hurt again. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. The deeper I got to know Emma, the more I realized she wasn't asking for perfection. She wasn't asking for me to be healed, to have everything figured out. She was just asking me to be me, and that was the first time in a long time that I allowed myself to be seen. To let someone into my life, flaws and all, without fear of judgment. One evening, we were walking along the river, the air cool and crisp. We had just finished dinner, and the night felt peaceful, almost serene. Emma was talking about her day, but I wasn't really listening. My thoughts were elsewhere. "Why are you so afraid to let people in, Nathan?" I asked myself silently. Suddenly, Emma stopped walking, turning to face me. "Nathan, what's going on? You've been quiet lately." I could feel the weight of her gaze on me. She wasn't pressuring me. She wasn't demanding an answer. She was just waiting. I took a deep breath. "I'm scared, Emma. I'm scared of trusting again. I'm scared that I'll let you in, and then I'll get hurt again." Emma smiled softly, her eyes understanding. She reached out, gently taking my hand in hers. "That's okay," she said simply. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything figured out." "I'm not going anywhere, Nathan, but I can't help you unless you let me." Her words hit me like a quiet wave. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not for the pain I had endured, not for the mistakes I had made, but for who I was right now. And that felt like a kind of freedom I hadn't experienced before. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Emma had said. She wasn't asking me to forget what had happened. She wasn't asking me to pretend that everything was fine. She was asking me to trust, to take a leap of faith, even when I couldn't guarantee the outcome. Trust wasn't about perfection, it was about embracing the uncertainty. It was about choosing to love, even when I couldn't see the entire path ahead. The following week, I decided to take that leap. I invited Emma over for dinner, something simple, just a quiet evening together. But this time, something was different. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't hiding behind walls or running away from the possibility of getting hurt. When she arrived, I looked at her and realized I was ready to trust again. "I don't have all the answers, Emma," I said, as we sat down at the table, our eyes locked. "But I want to give this a chance. I want to see where this can go." She smiled. The kind of smile that made my heart beat a little faster. "Me too," she replied softly. "We don't need to rush, we just need to take it one step at a time. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about learning to live with the cracks." It was easy to get lost in the idea of being whole again. I wanted to believe that I could go back to the person I was before the heartbreak. The person who could trust without fear, love without hesitation, and believe in the future. But the truth was, I wasn't that person anymore. And trying to go back would only leave me chasing something that no longer existed. I had changed. We all do, after painful experiences, after heartbreak. But there was something different about the way I was changing this time. I was learning to accept the broken pieces of myself. The cracks didn't define me, but they were part of me. I was learning to accept them, to let go of the need for perfection. It had been 2 months since I first opened up to Emma. Since then, we had spent time together almost every week, and though our relationship was still in its infancy, there was an ease between us that I hadn't expected. We laughed together, shared stories about our lives, and even discussed our hopes and fears. But there was always a quiet hesitation in the back of my mind. Even with her warmth and understanding, even with the deep connection we were forming, I still hadn't fully let go of the fear. I was scared of repeating my past mistakes, scared of loving again, of being let down. Emma never pushed. She never tried to hurry me. "We'll take it one day at a time," she had said. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. "I'm not going anywhere." There was a certain comfort in her patience. She wasn't asking me to be someone I wasn't. She was giving me space to heal, to be myself. And that was something I had never allowed myself before. One weekend, we went on a short trip to the coast. Emma had suggested it, an escape from the city, and though I was nervous about the idea of spending an entire weekend together, I agreed. The air was crisp by the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore. We spent our days walking along the beach, sitting on the sand, talking about our lives, our pasts, and our futures. Emma shared stories about her childhood, how she had grown up in a small town, the lessons she had learned, and the challenges she faced in her own life. As I listened, I realized something important. I wasn't the only one who had been hurt. Emma had her own scars, her own fears, her own past that shaped who she was today. But unlike me, she hadn't let it define her. She had taken the pain and used it to build a life of strength and resilience. It was in those moments, sitting by the ocean with Emma, that I felt something shift. Maybe love wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about accepting it, embracing the parts of us that had been broken, that had been scarred, and choosing to build something new, something real, with someone who understood. Even with all the progress I had made, there were still moments when fear crept back in. One evening, as Emma and I sat on the couch watching a movie, I felt a twinge of doubt. She was close to me, her head resting on my shoulder, but something felt off. I pulled away slightly, my mind racing with all the doubts I had tried to bury. What if I get hurt again? The thought flitted through my mind. What if she's just like Samantha? What if this is just another lie waiting to happen? Emma must have sensed the shift in me, because she looked up, her eyes meeting mine with quiet understanding. "Nathan," she said softly, her voice full of warmth. "I can't promise you that things won't be difficult. I can't promise you that you won't get hurt." I stiffened at her words, the fear rising up in my chest, but she placed a hand on my arm, gently stopping me from pulling away. "But I can promise you this. I'm not her. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to play games with your heart." Her words were simple, but they hit me with a force I hadn't expected. She wasn't Samantha. And I wasn't going to treat her as if she was. The days following our trip were filled with ups and downs, but I began to notice something important. The more I allowed myself to be vulnerable with Emma, the more I realized that healing wasn't an instant fix. It wasn't something that would happen overnight. There were still days when I felt a pull toward the past, when I would think of Samantha and the betrayal that had shattered my trust. There were still moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if I was capable of truly loving again. But there was also something new growing inside me. A small flicker of hope. A desire to be whole again, not just for Emma, but for myself. I wasn't ready to jump back into a relationship, but I was beginning to accept the idea of being loved and learning to love in return, slowly and without fear. One evening, after a long day at work, I was sitting alone in my apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The waves of emotion that had once overwhelmed me no longer held the same power. I had let them come and go, understanding now that the only way forward was to let go. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city. The lights below were bright and steady, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me just a few months ago. The past had been painful, but it was also a part of who I was. And that was something I had to accept. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the doubt, it didn't define me. I was not the man I used to be. I was stronger. I was wiser. And most importantly, I was learning to love myself again. The hardest part of starting over is not the fear of change. It's the courage to walk away from the past. A few months had passed since I first opened my heart to Emma, and with each day that passed, I felt a little more like the person I wanted to be. The emotional walls I had built around myself, walls built from betrayal, pain, and self-doubt, were slowly starting to crumble. But just because the walls were falling didn't mean I was entirely free. There were days when the echoes of the past would return, when the scars of betrayal would rise up, and I would question if I was truly ready to love again. Will I ever be enough? I had asked myself more times than I cared to admit. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I found myself staring at the painting I had been working on for weeks, an abstract piece that reflected my journey of healing. The strokes on the canvas were chaotic, yet the colors flowed together in a way that somehow felt harmonious. It was like a visual representation of my own recovery. It was messy, imperfect, but still beautiful in its own way. As I looked at the painting, I felt a sense of acceptance wash over me. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. My past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had made mistakes. I had been hurt. But those things had also made me stronger. For the first time, I felt genuinely at peace with myself. Emma and I had taken things slow, but there was a sense of certainty between us now. We weren't rushing into anything. We were letting things grow naturally. There was no timeline, no pressure. We simply allowed ourselves to be who we were, together. "I'm ready to take a step forward," I told her one evening as we sat in her living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light between us. I don't have all the answers, and I can't promise that I won't still have fears, but I know that I want to try. I want to give us, a chance." Her eyes softened, and she smiled, that same warm, understanding smile I had come to love. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Nathan. I'm not asking for anything more than what we have right now. We're building something real." The words felt like a balm on a soul that had been wounded, a reminder that love wasn't about perfection, it was about trust, understanding, and choosing to move forward together despite the past. Weeks later, I found myself sitting at a small cafe, a coffee cup in front of me, as I gazed out at the street. The sky was clear, and the early morning sun bathed everything in a golden light. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I wasn't racing toward the next chapter of my life, trying to escape the pain. Instead, I was learning to be present in the moment, to appreciate the small joys of life. I had made it through the darkest time of my life, the period when I had lost everything and thought I would never find my way back. And now, I was on the other side, stronger and more self-aware than I had ever been before. The pain of the past didn't feel as heavy anymore. It wasn't gone, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned to let go of the guilt, the anger, the resentment. I had learned to forgive, not for Samantha's sake, but for mine. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to fix what had been broken. I was the one who had to heal. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I no longer feared it. I was no longer living in the shadow of the past. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," I thought, smiling to myself. Emma was waiting for me in the park, her figure standing in the distance. When she saw me, she waved, her smile lighting up her face. The weight of everything I had carried for so long seemed to lift as I walked toward her. I didn't know where our relationship would go, or what challenges we would face, but for the first time in a long while, I knew I was capable of love again. I was capable of trusting again. We sat together in the park, the warm sun on our faces. There were no grand gestures, no big declarations, just two people who had been through the worst of life, and now, they were simply content in each other's presence. I had come to realize that love wasn't about perfection, or never being hurt again. It was about acceptance. Accepting yourself, your flaws, and your past, while still allowing yourself to open up to new experiences, new possibilities, and yes, new love. The journey wasn't over, but I had taken the first step. Months passed, and life continued to move forward. Emma and I found our rhythm, a balance between being ourselves and being together. We didn't rush into anything, but we allowed our relationship to grow, slowly and steadily. There was no rush. There was no need to look over our shoulders at the past. We were building something new, something genuine. I had learned to trust again. And that trust, first in myself, and then in Emma, was the foundation for everything that came next. I wasn't the man I had been before the betrayal. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way that healing wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about living with it, learning from it, and using it to grow. And in the end, that was enough.